I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, my topic is forgiving Hitler, and I've told myself that I'm just going to record this and then defer the decision about whether or not to release it. Since you're watching it, it means that what I decided was that the topic is too important not to talk about, despite the conflict that I see it creating between people who I consider friends and supporters. So why do I think this is important to bring up after all this time? The first area I'll look at is spiritual, and that will probably not be what you're expecting unless you've been watching my videos for a while. The second is psychological, what it means in terms of our own psychology. The third is looking at the geopolitical implications of the official narrative of World War II. And then the fourth area will be looking at system change and what it makes possible or impossible one way or the other. And then the fifth area I'll look at is hope and possibility. Let's get started. Those of you who have been watching for a while know that the question of good and evil and whether evil exists is something I always go back to. And I go back to it in terms of something theologians call the Theodicy Triangle. Now, this is important because Hitler represents the personification of evil. When someone says, well, does evil exist? The answer is Hitler, duh. So let's look at that Theodicy Triangle. What that says is that if God creates evil, then God must be evil in order to create evil. And if evil exists without God creating evil, then evil is God, because evil is stronger than God and able to exist without being created. And the only other possibility is that evil does not exist. So my go-to text, as you already know, if you've seen these before, is A Course in Miracles. And in A Course in Miracles, it looks at the possibility that what we are living in is a dream, is a nightmare, and that we are not the figure in the dream, that we are the dreamer. And I look at this from the perspective of there being only three options. One, God is a monster, going back to the earlier discussion. Two, that God doesn't exist. And three, that the world doesn't exist. So if we look at the possibility that what we're living in is a dream, then we need to apply Jungian analysis to that dream. And what Jung will say is that anything in that dream, whether it's a monster, whether it is a house, whether it's a shoe, all of those are you. Something in you is projecting onto that figure in the dream. So if we say Hitler is evil, then we're saying Hitler exists to begin with. And that means that this is no dream. This is all real. And that dream has power over us. We don't have power over it. And so in order to think of the possibility that this is our dream, rather than looking at Hitler as a person, if we look at Hitler as representing something that is happening in our mind that's dealing with guilt and what kind of projection we want to do with that, then that changes the equation. And so on that level, I think it's important to question and to forgive Hitler. Forgiveness is the most important practice in A Course in Miracles. I would say all of the meditations really go back to some form of forgiveness. But what it means by forgiveness is very different than what the world means. What the world means is, I, from on high, am going to look at your guilt, which is obvious. And because I am such a better person than you, I am going to forgive it. That just reinforces the guilt, and it just reinforces your superiority. You can't look at something and say, this is a terrible thing, but I am so much better that I'm going to overlook it. Instead, what I see forgiveness as is giving forward the benefit of the doubt. That what you're doing is saying, okay, I see you as having as much integrity as I do. And therefore, if you're doing this thing, which is dysfunctional, which is destructive, why are you doing it? Why would I do something like that? And so understanding what it is important, but also you need to be able to understand why, and understand why from a perspective of, in a different circumstance, that would be me. There is nothing better about me that would cause me to do anything different. Now I want to look at the psychological impact. I may have mentioned in the C.J. Hopkins video that for me, my beginning to question this was reading one of my daughter's copies of Night by Elie Wiesel when it was assigned to her in school, as it is to every high school student going back to when I was a high school student. And in it, what I read was him saying, and I saw with my own eyes the soldiers tearing babies from their mothers and throwing them into a pit of fire. And when I read that, I said, there's no way. That's just wouldn't be logical. And we all know Germans are logical. And if you want to have a group of people recognize that there's no hope and that they might as well overpower and get the guards now before they go anywhere else, because if they would do that, they would do anything, then do the worst possible thing that you can imagine. So I read that and I thought, how is it possible that people aren't looking at this? And then I started doing more research and I started pulling on that thread and finding out that there is a whole school of thought that Elie Wiesel did not attend Auschwitz, and that he has no tattoo, and that he also told his rabbi, when his rabbi asked, well, is that true? What you said, is everything true? And he said, sometimes you need to tell a lie in order to tell the truth. Sometimes the lie is more the truth than the truth. And so when I look at that, what I've heard back is people saying, well, that's just one person. Just because one person says something doesn't mean it's all a lie. And totally, I agree with that. That propaganda is the lies and the truth interwoven so that you recognize the truth and you swallow the lies at the same time. And that's why it's so important when you find one thing that you know to be a lie, that you keep pulling on that thread and see how much you unravel before you can separate the truth from the lies. Why does this matter? For at least the 50 years since I've been in high school, students have been reading this book. Teachers have been assigning this book. This book has been the eminent authority on the Holocaust. And no one's talking about this. No one's talking about this line in there that clearly, logically, could never have happened. That means that an entire 50 years of all the students in the United States and all the teachers have been taught not to think. They've all been taught not to question. They've all been taught not to see what's in front of their face if they're engaging with it logically rather than accepting it. And I think that that also relates to how we accepted 9/11 and the obviously wrong things that were presented to us with that. How we accepted JFK, how we accepted the vaccine and the virus and all of the things that we've been told that we are challenging. Those are all tied together, and they all start with that cognitive dissonance and saying, okay, I see this thing, but nobody else has seen it, so I better say that I don't see it either. I don't want to do that right now. I want to say, this is what I see. You tell me why I'm wrong, but you can't just reject it. And on a psychological level, I think it's important to look at where that conflict is coming from. What I've always told my daughters is that you can't create conflict. All you can do is make someone aware of the conflict that's already in their minds. If there's no conflict in their minds, they just dismiss what you're saying. It doesn't make them angry. Recently, because of a situation that's come up in my personal life, I was talking to my daughter again about the vaccine and impacts, and she got so angry that she almost decided not to come visit me. And when, fortunately, she did come, I asked her, I said, even if it's really hurtful to me, can you tell me where that anger is coming from? What's the internal dialogue? What is it that you're thinking when that feeling comes up? And after some self-reflection, what she came to was, I'm afraid you're right, and I don't know what to do about it. And I think that in all situations, if something is triggering for you, if it arouses an emotional response, that you need to look at where's that anger coming from, because clearly I have no power over anyone here, and what we think and whether we condemn Hitler, it's not exactly a radical virtue signaling stance to be, endorsing hatred of Hitler. It's the exact definition of who we're allowed to hate. So that's something that when I hear someone say, well, I'm Jewish, I have Jewish friends, that I knew people who did have tattoos from the Holocaust. And I don't deny any of that, but that shouldn't be a reason to reject what I'm saying and what I'm questioning. Because if you say, well, I knew people who died on 9/11, or I know someone who died of COVID, that's not a reason to say, well, you shouldn't be talking to me. That's a reason to be saying, you, out of everyone, should really want to know the truth. You should really want to know what really happened. What are the geopolitical implications of the official narrative of World War I to start with? That, by assigning guilt to the Germans, imposed the Treaty of Versailles and reparations and debt that were unpayable, that turned Germany into a labor and resource colony and inflicted genocide by starvation on them. Now, if we skip ahead to the official narrative of World War II, the end result has been Hitler, Nazis, and the Germans bad, the good guys won, and the United States, because it dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is the one who won that war, even though the U.S. wasn't in it for most of it. And that therefore it's created U.S. hegemony, even though we know that Winston Churchill wanted that war to start, that he provoked that war by sacrificing Poland in much the way that Ukraine is being sacrificed now. That what was said at the time is that Germans, ethnic Germans in Poland, were being murdered, and therefore it was an intervention, which is the same thing that Russia says now about Ukraine. We know that Russia is really who won World War II, and that Churchill wanted Germany and Russia to bleed each other dry, something that has been said again when we're looking at this provocation and prolongment of the engagement in Ukraine. Now let's look at system design. What Germany had done within 4 years was go from being in this horrible economic shambles of debt and reparations to having the strongest economy in Europe without any colonies to exploit. Now, one viewer sent me to a 3.5-hour documentary that I watched, and it was very interesting. There were many different pieces from JFK through 9/11 that was adding up a lot of different areas. It looks at satanic rituals. Now, I've got no doubt that those happen. That people, if you want to make sure that someone is going to do whatever it is you tell them to do and never talk about it, of course you're going to make them do something immoral, humiliating, and something that they're complicit in, and have it on tape. So that way you know that they're always going to be your subject. Of course you would do that. But whether satanic rituals have power, that's something I absolutely wouldn't even entertain the possibility of. Because if you're going to think that there is something supernatural, why not have that be something on your side? Why imagine something that takes power away from you? So I don't think that explained why Germany could do that in 4 years, because things like building the Autobahn, which they said that wouldn't have been possible without financiers who were putting in money. It doesn't take money to build an Autobahn. Money has no hands. Money cannot work. It's people who work. And if you create the money that enables those people to have reciprocity and to be doing that work, then you don't need foreign investment. So our official narrative has made it where we're blocking that entire possibility and that example, which I think is something that we're going to need when we all become Weimar. And the last thing I want to talk about is hope and possibility. Because if people are inherently good, and when they behave badly, systems are to blame, that means that we can trust other people. We don't need to control them. We don't need to make sure the good people win. All we need to do is change the system. And when we change the system, other people will want the same things that we want. And we can trust them to be as fair to others and as generous to others as we are ourselves. Thank you for giving me the benefit of the doubt for my integrity and opening this and watching all the way through. If you'd like to see more, this one is the reality puzzle and the propaganda playbook. And as you can see, I'm in the middle of another one, and I don't know the answer. I don't know how these things turn out. I just know that there's something that's not fitting. And then also socio-spirituality and small-scale sovereignty to look at the reality in the world and the reality of the world. Thank you.